every day. I usually do 10-10, but today I'm a little bit late, so sorry about that. So let's just give a little bit of an introduction to who I am. My name is Ashley and I'm an addictions counsellor. I also specialise in childhood and trauma, but I've also overcame addiction myself, and well, a few addictions actually. And I've also got loved ones who've had addiction, and I've studied it. I've got a master's in addiction. I specialise in addiction for one of my 2 counselling degrees, and I was doing my PhD in addiction. So I've got a very well-rounded understanding of it, and I'm here to help people every day, just checking in and providing a little space to talk about it. And if anybody wants some support, then yeah, chime in. So, oh, that's my lights went out. So, like every day, I've just been thinking of a little topic to talk about. And yesterday, I was experiencing a bit of daily stress, as we all do. And today, my friend was also dealing with stress and we had a little bit of meltdown. And I think it's in these times where we're most likely to go back into addiction. So I wanted to talk a little bit about ways that we can manage stress, because I think one of the things when we've recovered from addiction is that we can lean into it to help us manage just everyday stress. So it can be helpful to have some little therapeutic techniques to help with stress, so that when we're in our recovery, we've just got a better coping mechanism, because let's be real, that's what addiction is, it's a coping mechanism. So first of all, one of the things that my friend was saying is that she just ended up flipping a lid and it feels like a meltdown has came out of nowhere, which is exactly how I felt yesterday. And actually that is not true. I think what happens is it's like, imagine a champagne bottle that was shaking, and then all of a sudden one last shake and that cork comes off and all that emotion comes out. And I think that's what it is. So it's really important in recovery to try not to shake the champagne bottle. Or at least let this champagne bottle settle a little bit, so that we're not having this huge explosion. I'm trying to look for another way of describing it, but I need a little prop. I'm just gonna have to use this. Normally I'd use a pen. But again, if you think of like stress and anxiety, so everybody has anxiety. It's a normal human response to a perceived threat, or if we're experiencing some kind of psychological pain, we get anxiety. So if we think of anxiety like this is our baseline, and then if we experience anxiety in a healthy way, it'll spike and then it'll drop, and it might spike again a little bit higher and then it'll drop to the baseline. But if our stress levels are here, this is our baseline, it's taken a lot less time for that little spike to get to the top, and this is where everything feels so bad, so it's spiking up and then it's coming back to here. So it's really important that we've got our anxiety baseline down at the bottom. So how might we do that? Hi, Jula, I don't know how you say that. I'm very bad with pronouncing names, so apologies. So how might we keep that anxiety levels low? Obviously, we've got self-care. That's really important. So try and do things to fill your cup up. It's also putting in boundaries and feeling okay with that. So there's something that I heard someone say about addiction, which was so really true. It really resonated with us. And it said it was taught about boundaries. It said the people who have bad boundaries with others often have bad boundaries with themselves. And I was like, yes, that is so true. I really struggle to have boundaries with myself, with my addiction. And I really struggle to have boundaries with others. And it was this catch-22, because I was constantly overgiving and never saying no and building up resentment for all these people around us. And then I was like, that was feeding the addiction, and then the addiction was the relief, and I was struggling to have them boundaries with myself. So it's a two-way street. As soon as I started putting in boundaries with other people, it became a little bit easier to put boundaries in with myself. And it was this nice little thing where the more I put boundaries in with myself, I'll put it in with others. So boundaries is really important for our levels of stress. We need to make sure that we're not pouring our energy into things which realistically we need to be saying no to, so that we can keep that anxiety down here. The other thing that we can do for anxiety is we can start to pay attention to our bodies. So with addiction, often we're in planet off our nut, in la la land, and we're very disconnected from our bodies. And that's one of the problems that people often face, is when they're in recovery, all of a sudden they have to deal with everything that they've disconnected from. So with our anxiety and with recovery and addiction, it's really helpful to get into our bodies and see, how am I actually feeling? Like, am I feeling a bit overstimulated? How does stress feel for me? Where is stress? Get acquainted with it so that we can recognize it sooner and put in those boundaries and do less. Another thing with stress that we can do is making sure that we're recharging. So one of the things that I really need to hold my hand up for, because no person's perfect, is when I'm resting, I'm sitting there doom scrolling on social media, and that is not helpful for anxiety. And I noticed that actually I'm using a lot of mental energy, so I feel worse. So it's really important that we find something where we can actually tap into, where we can really de-stress. So for me, I've started writing a book, just sitting there writing for like, set a 15-minute timer. It'll be different for everybody else, but have some legit downtime where we're not just blasting our brains. So, but anyways, I noticed there's a few people on. Hi everyone. Feel free to say hi in the chat. Let us know, are you in active addiction and recovery? Is there anything you need help with? I am not just an addictions counsellor, I'm also a regular therapist. I'm pretty jack of all trades, so often addiction is a symptom. So if there's anything that anybody needs support with, feel free to ask and I will do my best. But yeah, I've really realised that, them stresses that my addiction was really helping with, when you take that coping mechanism away, you kind of left to manage it yourself. So it's really important to learn how to manage these things. And often for me, now this isn't the same for everyone, but I've got a friend who says they just don't get cravings at all. I'm nearly 4 years sober and I'll still get cravings, like little thoughts. It doesn't have that feeling attached to it, but I'm like, oh God, I'd love to have a cheeky weekend where I do that. And I use that as an opportunity to think about, woo, why am I thinking about that? There must be some kind of stress going on in my life. And it's quite a good opportunity to be able to think, right, let's go and assess what's going on in my life. What can I do differently? It's not about leaning into, that old life that I hated. It's about thinking what's going on and how can I manage this better. So yeah, trying to think of something else to talk about. I did talk yesterday about the label of addiction and being in recovery, and how that can be quite harmful for recovery for some people, certainly for me. And I spoke to my friend about this today, and she pointed out something quite good about that. So I'm going to revisit what I spoke about yesterday. And she had mentioned that it's not necessarily the label that's the issue, but rather the tense attached to the label. So if you're saying, I'm an addict, that is present tense, which means you're identifying with being an addict, which your brain is then, I'm an addict and I'm going to behave like an addict, because our brains just do things in autopilot. And if you say I'm in recovery, it's like, oh, I'm in recovery, which means at any point I can slip up. So what she pointed out, which was really helpful, is to say I'm recovered. I was an addict. So like really be careful in recovery that we talk about it in a past tense. So like, yes, we're in recovery, but I've recovered. I'm no longer an addict. I'm now just Ashley Bloxham, and I used to have an addiction. And it's really important that we're checking in, like, how are we talking about ourselves and what tense are we using and things, because our brains do pick up on it. It really does. And it's even with things like, I notice, like people say about manifesting, I'm quite spiritual, but even if you take the spirituality side away and you look at it from a psychology side, I notice that when I'm saying I'm ill all the time, I become more ill. And I think it's you could say it's manifesting, but for me, I believe it's because I'm kind of adopting this mindset of I'm ill, therefore I can't do as much, and therefore I'm not going to go to the gym, and therefore I'm going to eat that easy food. So it kind of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it's because that's the way our brains work. We kind of tell ourselves a narrative and a story, and it runs on it. So it is really important that we tell ourselves the right story, the right narrative to run on, especially if we've struggled with addiction or if we're trying to get away from addiction. So I think that can be helpful. Yeah. So I'm going to leave it here because we're not normally I get a few comments, and usually when people comment, it gives us a little bit of things to talk about. And what I like to do is just pop on with my 15-minute chat, and if anybody have any questions, then I'll answer them. But we've got a little bit of a quiet day today, so just thought I'd pop on, share what I had to say about anxiety. But thank you for joining, everyone, and I hope you got something from that. I'll be going live again on Monday, but I do a podcast, a live podcast on YouTube every Sunday with one of the most inspirational women I've ever met, and she's overcame addiction and smashed it in ways that it's just so inspiring. So every Sunday at 11:11, because I love a good number, we go live, we do a live podcast, and we do a live Q&A at the end. So feel free to join. Thank you for joining today, and I'll see you on Monday. Bye.